So, you know, the challenging piece too is to have business apps or hear Microsoft talk about, Power Automate and some of these other things is that, you still need some level of technical capabilities. And so there's this balance of where you're getting to trying to enable or equip people who don't have as deep technical skills. You're trying to equip them with tools and a platform to become more efficient in their businesses. And so, um, in terms of apps and app stores, I think if you've been in this industry long enough, so early 2010s, I was working with Siemens, and Siemens now has launched MindSphere and some other, if you followed that. And GE had launched Predix back in the day. There's been a lot of attempts at the app platform, if you will, and copying some of the success of Android, Apple, and even Microsoft with their Windows Store. And it's been really tough. And it's been tough because even when, let's say, GE launched Predix, you had to train people on a tool called Cloud Foundry, and you still were lacking this kind of technical skills gap. And so I think you'll see the general industry trend is to try and make, building apps or these automation tools simpler and simpler. So um, again, kind of stole it from the video. I hadn't seen the video ahead of time, but this is something from Bessemer. It was a pretty famous venture fund. Essentially, it's showing a differentiation between cloud and software, and the point being that probably as you're seeing in your businesses today, or even here at Corva, is like software is not enough. It's also dependent on where that software is running and the difference that it's making, and that's in the cloud. I think much of Corva's success, as one of the gentlemen this morning pointed out, is that SCADA and data collection has been done for over 30, 40 years, and that's not new. People have been remote drilling and monitoring operations for a long time. But you'll notice the rise of cloud-enabled, SaaS-enabled software, this ease and ability to just jump on a web browser and see that same information without having huge IT infrastructure. That's what's changing. So the costs are being driven lower and the capabilities are going higher. And so the prediction is essentially within the next 10 years, nearly all the software that's there will actually be dominated and running in the cloud. Now, the other problem that you have is that in order to get things to run in the cloud, as I'm sure many of you have seen, is it's incredibly challenging to go from on-premise SQL servers, virtual machines, et cetera, and then have a skilled cloud architect and developers that know how to do that. And so the lack of availability of very skilled developers has driven up the prices for skilled developers. And even, we're seeing this mass resignation and relocation of people right now. It's crazy when you're trying to hire Python, Kubernetes people, et cetera. I mean, the developers are loving it because it's a developer's market. I mean, they're commanding huge salaries, right? And so it's tough if you're going to be, the big oil companies of the world, and you're competing now against startups or Facebook or Google's, that everybody's fighting for this talent, and it's expensive. So, so what are people doing to kind of solve that? And I think it goes back to the whole talk, and what we're focused on is having low code, no code, or efficient ways to empower more people to build effective applications in the organization. So there's a slight difference between, I would call, true just no code and low code. No code would truly be just point and click and you're stitching things together. And I'll give an example of that in just a second. And low code could be, writing little scripts, or in general, even I've seen a bigger trend of, people that have worked, let's say, as CPAs or accountants, very skilled in Excel. They're very good, let's say, VB script macros, and they can translate those skills into writing snippets of code and working on cloud platform tools. To give you an idea about how many no code tools there are out there, I'd be curious, like one very famous one I know, a lot of companies on the marketing side, but HubSpot as an example. HubSpot is way more than a CRM, and they've differentiated outside of Salesforce in that, you can build these automations like that trigger when someone fills out a form on the website and runs a full drip campaign. You can enable a marketing specialist to do that without even having to have a developer stitch that all together. So the state of no code is immense because all of these companies are going after equipping and empowering different parts of the organization to have highly technical solutions that are solving real problems. So it's really crazy about how many platforms are out there, and you probably use a lot of these in your business, as do we. The example of like a low code, and really what this is solving, is this solving the problem of people. It's really aimed at equipping non-technical users to solve efficiency problems. The downsides of low code, no code, it does have limited functionality, and you still need some technical knowledge. And even worse is if you've ever tried to build something, let's say, I'm not dogging Microsoft Power Apps, but if you are a developer and you've been told to build an app on Power Apps, it's almost more painful to debug, because they've restricted what you're able to see, the logs, etc. So Power Apps, though, has been featured, I think, at every Microsoft Ignite conference as like, I went to one a couple years ago where there was an employee for, I think it was United Airlines, who had an idea about better ways to handle or scan baggage. And he basically was able to teach himself in a couple of months how to stitch together Power Apps and launch something for the organization. So he's kind of a success story. So Power Apps is a great one. It's kind of the first keynote today. If you're interested in looking at what they have of building apps, that's kind of Microsoft's app framework. Now we'll get into something that's called like the version of new app building that does require some technical skill, but essentially it is still aimed towards the developer. So going away from the talk today, a large part of what I'm doing with Corva right now and its relation to Dev Center is I've used both of these platforms a lot to quickly build enterprise-grade applications. So FIREBASE is Google's app building platform, and AWS Amplify is their app building platform. And let me go into what I think an app building platform really means. So these app building platforms solve a different problem. They're now aimed at solving the problem of what I call the many developer problem, which is, even 5 years ago, 7 years ago, if you wanted to build a cloud app, you're hiring DevOps, some, site reliability engineers, sysadmin for Linux, your front-end people, your back-end people. And in many ways, how Corva got to be where it is, we have to hire those people to build that platform. These app building platforms specialize around making things serverless and automated so that you can focus on hiring less people in the exchange for maybe being more vendor locked in with these providers. So there's really nice stuff about this, though, is that as an example, for a backend, both AWS Amplify and FIREBASE will offer backend as a service. So you don't have to worry about scale. As your usage goes up, they claim unlimited scale, etc. So that's a big plus. Second is with these platforms, you can just hire a Node.js or a Python developer, and they can actually go right back end, front end, and everything in between. You're not having to go find different specializations to do all that. So it's streamlined at solving. You don't need as many developers. The downside of doing this app building is like you're still slinging code. You're writing code from the ground up, but it's solving some problems. So how does FIREBASE look? So feel free to go look at Google's docs and other things afterwards. I'll just point out here, everything you would need to kind of get a basic enterprise application going, as well as monitor that app, is all in one place. So your authentication, authorization, how you store app metadata, storing files, hosting, serverless functions, and machine learning are all in one place, stitched together, really easy to use. The docs are really easy to use. Let's not just think about apps, though, just as the components to build. In our case, and the roadmap for Corva, we want to offer the same things, is running an application also requires monitoring. Do we have buggy code in production? How are we figuring out whether it's efficient or not? So FIREBASE in this case also offers, basically, you could imagine, a complete end-to-end Google Analytics tie-in that allow you to monitor everything about your app in production. So downside of FIREBASE, of course, Google, it's completely proprietary. So once you build on that, it's very hard to probably migrate off. And so that's kind of your exchange there when you're thinking about building apps. But really great, supports web and mobile, and I've done it a lot, and it's a very effective platform. So the second is the move AWS is making is interesting. They launched a product called Amplify, which takes a slightly different approach. Amplify basically wraps around existing AWS services. So I think what AWS is seeing right now is that Google's taking this completely vendor lock-in approach, and AWS is saying, "Hey, we want to provide this kind of same ease and functionality of scalability and development, etc." But they're wrapping around common AWS services, so you're not locked into a proprietary database, as an example. So check out Amplify. They have great YouTube videos, etc., for building apps. So now relating that into Dev Center, the only downside of also building an app is you don't have data. You don't have the core of what actually makes an app worth using. And so in many ways, I think what Dev Center's solving is we're kind of taking the best of both worlds. Number one is, I've said for a long time, and Ryan and I have talked about this, about how do you use the data and the intelligence from oil and gas and streamline the app building process. We're doing that by having a good understanding of what the data sets look like, WITS-ML data, completions data, and making that data easily and accessible and available to develop. The second thing is we are looking at this through a lens of how do we streamline the developer problem, where it's hard to hire a lot of skill sets to build big enterprise grade apps. And so you'll see, as you hopefully further engage in Dev Center, is this quick ability to find either a Node.js or a Python skill set, have reusable components, and then already have a large amount of the data your apps are going to consume just available. You're not designing databases, massive schemas, and doing this data quality, which costs a lot of time. So I think as part of that vision, we are learning a lot from what the Googles and the AWSs of the world are doing. And of course, not as many components would say as FIREBASE or something else, but it's really structured again on the data, back-end logic, front-end apps. And if you've been on Dev Center, you've probably seen these basics. And so Michael just gave a talk too on building an app that you can go watch and review. I think this is the other powerful thing that people haven't tackled and of course aren't available. This is an ability to add applications from other providers or Corva itself to streamline your own app development. So there's a really, I think, unique way that we're especially piecing together front-end or back-end applications so you don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over again. And that is, I think, another thing in app development is the more you can componentize and reuse your libraries, the faster you'll be, and you'll have better reliability because you've QA, QC'd a lot of this. So I think it's really powerful and a big differentiator that Corva's focused on. So what's coming? Better apps with a better Dev Center. We've made, I think, massive investments and will continue to make investments on improving the docs. When I started, few weeks back, I guess a little bit, the folks here asked me for an honest opinion. I said, we've got to really overhaul the docs, right? Documentation to developing apps, both video, how it's structured. We're investing a lot of time on that and really putting a lot forward there to make the docs as best as they can. And we don't have to invent that wheel. Google, AWS, these guys have done a good job around enabling hundreds of thousands of developers to build on their platform. More code examples and short videos. Michael's working really hard. We're bringing on more dev advocates, and I'm really a big proponent of having pre-canned examples, other apps, so that we can more quickly enable these apps to get spun up. I'm at my 15 minutes, I guess, so I'll take any questions if there are.